Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to our NASA Young Professionals Town Hall featuring the NASA Administrator, Mr. Jim Bridenstine. My name is Jacqueline Silva Martinez, and on behalf of the IAF Workforce Development and Young Professional Program Committee, I'm happy to welcome you here as your moderator for this session. I was selected based on IAF's 3G diversity focus: gender, generation, and geographical international experience. I was born in Peru and moved to the United States when I was 15 to pursue my studies. I have been involved with the IAF Workforce Development Committee, AIAA Young Professionals Group, and SGAC, among other organizations. I'm an aerospace engineer with a specialization on human systems integration, currently working at NASA Johnson Space Center, where I serve in two primary roles: as a flight controller in the operations planning group for the International Space Station, and as a systems engineer leading the development of integrated operations scenarios for the Artemis III program. Our goals in this global networking forum are to allow young professionals to interact with one of the preeminent leaders in our space community, to hear about where NASA is headed, and to learn what role young professionals have in that vision. Mr. Bridenstine will start with some opening remarks. Then we'll have a few questions that we received from our various young professional outlets, and we'll open the floor for questions from the young professionals in the audience. So please start thinking of what you would like to ask him. Without further ado, I will introduce our guest of honor, Mr. Jim Bridenstine, who was sworn in as NASA's 13th administrator on April 23, 2018. Prior to this current role, Mr. Bridenstine served in the U.S. House of Representatives and as a pilot in the U.S. Navy. In his time at NASA, Mr. Bridenstine is best known for initiating the Artemis program to take humans back to the moon by 2024. Mr. Bridenstine, over to you.
All right. Test. All right. Hey, it's great to be here. I love interacting with young professionals, and we have a big agenda as an agency, and really what we're trying to do is build a coalition of nations that can go to the moon sustainably. In other words, this time when we go to the moon, we're actually going to stay for long periods of time. We're going to learn how to live and work on another world, and we're going to take all of that knowledge, all of that technology, and we're going to go to Mars. When we go to the moon, we're going to go with international partners. We're also going to go with commercial partners. And in an effort to achieve that, we need to commercialize low Earth orbit as much as possible first. What does that mean? That means in the future, NASA is not going to purchase, own, and operate all of the hardware. Instead, we're going to buy services. We're doing that right now. That's the way we resupply the International Space Station, with commercial resupply. It's the way we are about to do crew to the International Space Station with commercial crew. But then ultimately what we're really looking for is habitation in low Earth orbit. I'm talking about space stations in low Earth orbit that are commercial in nature, and that the money that goes into those space stations, yes, NASA will be a customer of those space stations, but more importantly, we want other customers to be a part of those space stations as well. So right now we're using the International Space Station for a number of lines of effort. Number one, we're looking for industrialized biomedicine capabilities from the space station that will result in investments from the private sector for that eventual habitation in low Earth orbit that would be commercial in nature. But we're also looking at advanced materials. So we're looking at commercializing low Earth orbit. We're looking at taking the resources that we get from the American taxpayer and going to the moon, where there is not yet a commercial industry, but we're always keeping in mind that we want to see commercial industry at the moon as well. But ultimately, we want to take all of the knowledge that we get from the moon and go on to Mars. I just want to talk for a real quick second about how important Mars is. Within the last year, we have found, and you guys are young professionals, so what gets discovered in your lifetime is going to be amazing. But within the last year, we have found liquid water 12 kilometers under the surface of Mars. What do we know about liquid water? Anywhere that it exists on Earth, there is life. Is that true on Mars? We don't know, but we should go find out. We also know that there's complex organic compounds all over the surface of Mars. That means that the building blocks for life exist on Mars. I'm not saying there's life there, I don't know, but the building blocks for life exist on Mars, and they don't exist at all on the moon. 0. What else do we know about Mars? We now know that the methane cycles of Mars are commensurate with the seasons of Mars, which increases the probability that we could find life. I'm not saying we will, I'm saying the probability just went up. So all of these discoveries are done within the last year. Before that, with Spirit and Opportunity, we found that Mars at one time in its history had an ocean in its northern hemisphere. We know because of that it had a thick atmosphere, and we know that it had a strong magnetosphere that protected it from the radiation of deep space. Even if there's not life there now, which we don't know if there is or not, but there very well could have been life there in the past, and we need to go make those discoveries. So all of this, when we talk about going to the moon, we need to keep in mind why we're going to the moon. We're going to the moon for the purpose of getting to Mars, and ultimately as we explore our solar system, we're following the water and we're looking for life on other worlds. Not that we know it's there because we don't, but we are absolutely looking for it. Finally, I think this is an important message that we need to continue to repeat. When we went to the moon last time in the 1960s, we loved it. It was Apollo. It was a great day in the history of humanity. But in those days, there were no opportunities for women to go to the moon. All of our astronauts came from fighter pilot backgrounds and test pilot backgrounds, and there were no opportunities for women. Well, today we have a very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women. So we decided to name our lunar program after the twin sister of Apollo in Greek mythology. Her name is Artemis. She is the goddess of the moon in Greek mythology. And so this time when we go with this very diverse, highly qualified astronaut corps that includes women, we are going under the name of the goddess of the moon, who happens to be the twin sister of Apollo. Her name is Artemis. So with that, I'm here to answer questions and hear what your thoughts are and hear about your dreams and your future and what you're hoping that we do in the future. So with that, thank you for having me. I look forward to answering your questions.
So we have some volunteers going around with the microphones, so please raise your hand if you have a question and they'll get to you. But I'll start with a couple of questions that we receive ahead of time from young professionals as well. So with so much momentum to private industry, or in private industry, why should young professionals be excited about coming to work for NASA?
So all of that private industry is being spawned by NASA. But look, we need young professionals and amazingly talented individuals working in that industry that NASA employs. I mean, that's the idea. These are public-private partnerships. So we look at companies out there that are doing amazing work for NASA. Remember what NASA is trying to achieve. We are trying to be a customer. We want, in many cases, we want to be one customer of many customers in a very robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit. And we want to have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation in that marketplace. And if we achieve that, and you're working in that private industry, then we have been successful. The goal is to build the commercial marketplace, especially for low Earth orbit, so that we can take the resources that we have and we can build towards the moon, always keeping in mind that there's commercial opportunities there as well. So it's not an either or, it's an all of the above. And a lot of these industries and businesses that are commercial in nature, they were born from an agency called NASA, and we like that. We talk about commercial crew, we talk about commercial resupply, we talk about commercial habitation. All of these companies that are doing these activities are doing it because NASA invested heavily in those activities.
Thank you. We'll have one more and then we'll get to the floor. With the fast approaching deadline of humans in the moon by 2024, how is NASA making sure that we are not repeating mishaps that happened in past missions when pressed to design for project completion?
Great question. So schedule pressure is something that people do discuss frequently at NASA. We have learned the lessons of Challenger. We have learned the lessons of Columbia. What we are doing now is we have not changed our organizational structure. We have what we call independent technical authorities that have the ability to stop work if things look dangerous. And the challenge is historically you have a vertical integration of the program. So you have a program manager, a project manager, all of the engineers involved in that project, and they're all trying to meet cost and schedule. Well, if the person you report to is trying to meet cost and schedule, and you're ultimately stopping them from meeting cost and schedule, that results in schedule pressure that results in what could be a catastrophic failure. However, we now have what we call independent technical authorities. This came out of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. But these independent technical authorities, they are engineers that are embedded in the projects, but they don't report to the project manager. They report to independent technical authorities, and if they need to throw a red flag, they can feel free to do it. But to be clear, this is not about schedule pressure. This is about schedule, number one. And ultimately being able to achieve things that we haven't been able to do now since the retirement of the space shuttle back in 2011. So we're talking about it's been a long time. So it's not like there's been a lot of pressure. But at the end of the day, here's what we need to do. We need to fly humans again. And when we fly humans, we need to make sure that we have those independent technical authorities that are making sure that we are safe as we do it. So none of the safety processes and procedures that have been in place have been changed, but we do need to start flying humans again.
Okay, thank you. And the independent technical authorities are groups or just one person per mission?
Yeah, so we have a chief engineer, and we have a chief of health and human safety. We have a chief technologist, and these are independent technical authorities that report directly to me. But embedded in all of the projects and programs, they have people embedded. So those people that are embedded report to them, and they report to me. So yes, it is an organizational construct that goes all throughout the agency.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's get to the question. Karen, yeah.
First off, Chris Nye from Lockheed Martin. I'm also representing the Space Generation Advisory Council. Thank you, Administrator Bridenstine, for spending the time with us. Thank you, Ms. Sylvia Martinez, for setting up this wonderful reception. My question is, what can we as young professionals do to help build the international coalition to take us to the moon and then Mars, since so many of these agreements at the multilateral level seem so high?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're obviously already involved. The group that you just mentioned you're involved in, say it again.
SGAC?
Space Generation
Advisory Council.
Advisory Consulate? Council. Okay, got it. Okay. Space Generation Advisory Council. Fantastic. So that is obviously important to be able to organize and then be able to do what is necessary to maybe talk to your representatives. Bottom line is this. We talk about commercial this and commercial that. Whether you're commercial or a traditional company, bottom line is all the money's coming from the government. That's just the reality right now when it comes to human spaceflight. We want to see a day when it's not coming from the government, when there are customers that are paying for the services that are not the United States government. We're not there yet. We need to get there. But SEDS, I think, is a good group. Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. Yeah, there you go. So I think these are good groups for young folks that are involved in space, and they have voices, and they collaborate, and they organize, and then they communicate. And anything you can do like that, I think, is fantastic. But I do think it's important. Young people have to be involved. I'm 44 years old. I'm the first NASA administrator that wasn't alive when we landed on the moon. Like, I don't have that memory. I'm the first NASA administrator that doesn't have that memory. You obviously don't have that memory either because you're a lot younger than I am. We have to make sure that we don't have another generation that goes by where we don't have people living and working on the moon or any other planetary body for that matter. And so we have to organize. We have to commit ourselves to this. We talk about the Apollo generation. I like talking about the Artemis generation. We are demanding that we do these activities because it's important for humanity to do these activities. And it goes beyond any one individual, it goes to all of us. The Artemis generation, I would implore you to keep using and identifying yourselves as the Artemis generation.
Okay. And also, SGAC represents all the students and young professionals to the United Nations, so we have a big role there, and hopefully that comes around also to politicians and helps us to move Artemis and other goals of space to the future.
That's great, yeah.
Another question we have, who has the mic? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello? All right. Hi, Jim. Thanks for talking to us. My name is Michael Gunderman. The question I have is about Artemis and also low Earth orbit commercialization that you mentioned, because we've been talking a lot about this sort of in the industry, and I know companies like NanoRacks are moving forward with plans on doing this low Earth orbit commercialization, but everyone is, of course, reliant on NASA as a customer. So do you think that the push for all this funding for Artemis could be a challenge to secure the funding for low Earth orbit commercialization? Because, you know, as we've said, everyone is relying on NASA to be a customer, and that would require extra funds. So do you think we'd end up in a bad situation where we won't be able to fund both these programs simultaneously? What's your view on that?
It's a great question. And this is quite frankly where there is sometimes a disconnect between what policymakers believe and what the truth is. And so you can help with this. This is such an important question. Some people say, policymakers say, that the International Space Station is competing against commercial space stations, and therefore it's prohibiting the commercialization of space. That is fundamentally untrue. I don't know anybody who's interested in commercial space stations who would say that. What the International Space Station does is it enables commercialization. That's what we're using it for. Right now, like I mentioned, we've got commercial resupply, we've got commercial crew. We will soon have commercial habitation. Some of that commercial habitation is going to have to be incorporated with the space station. Environmental control, life support systems, those capabilities that are resident on the space station can be tested with habitation modules that attach to the International Space Station. So that's important. But more than anything, as you said, NASA will have to be a tenant customer in the early days of this activity. But we are also working every day on capabilities that will result in private capital financing habitation in low Earth orbit. I mentioned 2 lines of effort. One is industrialized biomedicine. So when it comes to immunizations, we can create immunizations in a microgravity environment that you cannot create in the gravity well of Earth. There's a market there for that activity. When it comes to compounding pharmaceuticals, we can do that in a microgravity environment that you cannot do on Earth. There's a market capability there. Right now, we are proving that we can print human organs in 3 dimensions on the International Space Station using adult stem cells. That will be transformational for life on Earth. When we talk about doing that activity on the Earth, the tissue just goes flat because of the gravity. And so you have to create this lattice structure that makes, you know, the tissue less relevant, less usable. But if you can do it in the microgravity of space and then bring it back to Earth, we're proving whether or not that works, and we're iterating experiments to see if that can be a market segment. We're demonstrating right now that we can create retinas, basically retinal implants for people that have macular degeneration so that you don't have to go blind. And those kind of materials, the layering of materials for a retinal implant, you can do that in space in a way that you can't do it on Earth. Why does that make me so excited? Because those retinal implants are reimbursable to the tune of $75,000 well, I'm talking about Medicare, $75,000. So all of a sudden, if you can take a small box to the International Space Station and come down with 1,000 retinal implants, all of a sudden the business case closes because Medicare reimburses at $75,000 per. What that means is that there are market opportunities that will be transformational. They will be transformational breakthroughs for humans on Earth. That's why low Earth orbit is so important. I didn't even talk about advanced materials and Z-band and very pure fiber optics. So we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about industrialized biomedicine, advanced materials. These capabilities that will have breakthroughs for us on Earth are ultimately what will lead to capitalization of these activities in low Earth orbit. And I really think we're somewhere between 3 and 7 years away from at least one major breakthrough that's going to result in capital flows that we can't right now even imagine. If we achieve that, the only way it will have been achieved is by using the International Space Station. The International Space Station is the process by which we commercialize. It is not the prohibitor of us commercializing, if that makes sense. So we need to remember that if we use the space station correctly, and I'm not saying we always have, but if we do use it correctly, all of us will be able to do more in space than we would ever have been able to do without the space station. But we have to use it correctly. We need to iterate those experiments one after another until we get to commercial capabilities where private capital flows, and then industry can respond to that private capital. So that's the goal. Now, if all of this unfolds, there will be more resources for space activities than ever before. And then we can use the resources that the American taxpayer gives us and the taxpayers from the countries that you come from out there, and there's a lot of different countries represented here, then those resources can be used to do things for which there is not yet a commercial marketplace, namely go to the moon and then on to Mars. So we will all be able to do more when we work on the commercialization effort, but you're right. Some people would say that if we're putting money towards commercialization, and NASA will be the anchor tenant, then we're going to cannibalize other activities. That's not the goal. The goal is for all of us to be able to do more than we could ever do if we weren't commercializing.
And also the International Space Station provides a lot of benefits for humanity. I invite you to Google that. There's a website on NASA looking at 5 different domains on how ISS helps with that. One of the technology demonstrations that was done from flight operations recently was looking at the crew autonomous scheduling. So how the crew can actually do their own schedules on a station. Right now they work from ground station, so we have to provide everything to them for them to follow. But when they go to the moon or Mars, they're going to have to do a lot of that on their own. So the ISS serves as a test bed for those kind of tests.
Absolutely.
So that's also an invitation for you. If you have some technology demonstrations that you want to incorporate, send it through the different venues that we have to get experiments into ISS. We have another question? Yes.
Hi, Administrator. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of our questions. My name is Kelsey Herndon. I work for a program called SERVIR, which is a joint program between NASA and the United States Agency for International Development. So there's a lot of excitement over Artemis and going back to the moon and going to Mars, and rightfully so. But my question is, as we push humans deeper into space, will NASA continue to prioritize improving the human condition on Earth? And if so, what major contributions do you see your program making? Thanks.
Oh, absolutely. My goodness, there's so much to talk about. So we talk about how do we improve the human condition on Earth, and we just talked about all of these activities in space as it relates to human activities in space, on space stations, private space stations, the International Space Station. But more than that, think about where we are today that the Apollo astronauts could not even dreamed of. We talk about communications. Some people in this room probably have Dish Network or DirecTV. Maybe they listen to XM radio. Some people in this room get their internet broadband from space. I come from Oklahoma. In rural Oklahoma, if you don't have internet from space, you don't have the internet in many places. And I know that's true throughout a lot of America. And so these are just communication capabilities that are significant, and of course they were born from this little agency called NASA, and these communication capabilities have elevated the human condition and connected us in a way that otherwise would not be available, the internet namely, most specifically. But of course all the other capabilities as well. But that's just communications. We talk about GPS and the transformational capabilities of navigation through GPS, again made possible by NASA. It's operated by the Department of Defense, but at the same time it's a technology that was born from NASA. We also talk about how we produce food. Right now we are using NASA's Earth science capabilities and USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey Landsat satellites, which are built by NASA. And we are using those satellites, along with NASA's Earth science capabilities, to increase crop yields, while at the same time reducing water use by as much as 25% and preserving nitrates in the soil. And then those nitrates, because they stay in the soil where they actually help plants grow, they don't end up in our drinking water and spend millions of dollars cleaning the drinking water out. So whether we're talking about how we produce food, how we produce energy more cleanly using, again, the earth science capabilities of NASA, we can see methane leaks instantaneously. We can inform energy companies. They can shut off the greenhouse gases because we inform them. And here you have an alignment between energy companies and environmentalists, because now all of a sudden the energy companies don't want to get fined by the EPA, and NASA can help them prevent getting fined by making sure they're not polluting the environment. So these are just transformational capabilities for all of humanity. Then we talk about disaster relief. We talk about weather prediction. I mean, all of the weather satellites that the United States operates are built by NASA with our contractors, of course. And then, of course, understanding climate, again, those satellites built by NASA with our contractors. So all of these capabilities that have improved the human condition were born from this little agency called NASA, and I've only begun to touch the surface. As the NASA administrator, what I hear about all the time, I hear about Tang and Velcro. And just so everybody knows, we've done a lot more than Tang and Velcro. We've done all of these things, and again, we've only touched the surface. Now, as we think about these improvements to humanity from space exploration, we cannot dismiss how important so much of what we do in space is. And what does that mean? That means it becomes existential. It becomes a risk. It becomes a threat. And when I say that, what I'm talking about is, imagine if we lost the GPS signal. Without the GPS signal, there's no banking in the United States of America. Every banking transaction requires a GPS timing signal. When you talk about terrestrial wireless networks, I see everybody with their cell phones filming me. When you talk about terrestrial wireless networks, they require a timing signal from GPS, for example. Without that, there is no terrestrial wireless network. We talk about the power grid. The power grid requires a timing signal from GPS. So when a nation out there calls space the American Achilles heel, and a nation out there launches direct ascent anti-satellite missiles that would damage space for the United States of America, we have to now understand that yes, space has elevated the human condition, but now, because it has elevated the human condition, some have identified it as, if they can destroy it, they can bring America to its knees. And we've got to make sure that that doesn't happen. It has to be protected because our commerce, our way of life is dependent on it. And of course, we want to make sure that we are protecting it. So yes, it has elevated the human condition, and yes, it needs to be protected.
Mm-hmm. And that's the importance of spin-ins and spin-offs of what we learn in space that we are directly applying here on Earth. Questions? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. You have the mic? Oh, over there. Thanks.
Hi there. My name is Eleanor Morgan, and I'm from Bigelow Aerospace. So obviously, it's a very exciting time for our company right now. And I was just curious if you could kind of discuss what your thoughts are, your confidence level maybe right now on the phase 2 of the Gateway. And then also, kind of discuss maybe the vision for a Mars transport vehicle, and if you think that's coming from the Gateway, or if that would be something that would be separate and launched from Earth.
Great question. So she's referencing phase 2 of the Gateway. So people in the room that might not be familiar, we really have 2 mandates. One is to get to the moon within 5 years. And so that is going to require phase 1 of the Gateway. So we think about the SLS rocket, the Orion crew capsule, the European service module. These are capabilities that get us up to what we call a near rectilinear halo orbit, which is a distant orbit from the moon. But if we go all the way to low lunar orbit, we don't have enough delta V to get out of low lunar orbit with that capability. So what do? We go to that near rectilinear halo orbit, which is a distant orbit from the moon, and then from that position, we can aggregate at the Gateway a landing system. So really, if we're trying to go fast to the moon, if we're trying to get to the moon in 2024, we need to aggregate a landing system at the moon at the earliest possible date. And we just put out a broad agency announcement to achieve that goal. In other words, to get a human landing system aggregated at the Gateway. So that's really what phase 1 is all about. And so for phase 1 at the Gateway, in orbit around the moon, at that near rectilinear halo orbit, for that phase 1, we really need a power and propulsion element, and we need what we are now calling HALO, which is basically just a pressure vessel. So our astronauts can go from the Orion into the landing system. That's all it is. It's a way to transfer astronauts to the landing system and get them to the surface of the moon and go fast. But what are we trying to achieve with Gateway? And that's really what phase 2 is all about. Phase 2 is about a long-term, sustainable capability at the moon. We want to be able to go to the moon sustainably. We want to be able to stay. And we want to be not just on the surface of the moon, we want to be in orbit around the moon. And we want it to be maneuverable. We want to be able to go to the North Pole of the moon and the South Pole of the moon and make all of the lunar discoveries that we need to make. To achieve that, we are going to need more habitation capability at the Gateway than just the HALO, which is basically just a pressure vessel. And so the answer is yes, we're going to need more capability. And the answer would be there should be opportunities in the future for that phase 2 for commercial capabilities, for Bigelow and others to compete to achieve that. I have nothing to announce right now. I know there's reporters here. They're all saying this right now. They're writing their stories. There's nothing to report right now. Here's what we're focused on. We're focused on phase 1, and we're looking at least we want to have an international habitation module as part of phase 2 for the sustainability effort. But the Gateway is not limited to that. The Gateway from that position can grow. It is evolvable. And I would see that would be the optimum opportunity to go to Mars would be from the vicinity of the moon, from the orbit around the moon, because you can leave from the orbit around the moon with a lot less delta V requirement than if you left from the surface of the moon or low lunar orbit. But from that near rectilinear halo orbit, the amount of delta V it takes in order to get where you need to go in the solar system, you have a lot more opportunities from that near rectilinear halo orbit. NRHO. I need to start using that because that's a mouthful. NRHO. So when we talk about the Gateway, it's about sustainability. It's about more access to more parts of the moon. It's about enabling our commercial partners to be able to use the Gateway in ways that they otherwise wouldn't be able to participate. It's about enabling our international partners to participate. The way I think of it is you can do all kinds of things if you have a Gateway in orbit around the moon that you can't do if you don't. For example, we can do science missions around the moon that we could never do if we didn't have a Gateway. The Gateway, in essence, could be a comms relay. So there's a mission. Ames is here. I can see the Ames crew is in the audience. Ames has a mission called Dapper that I'm very excited about, where they're going to be in orbit around the moon. From the far side of the moon, they're going to be able to see not just back to the cosmic dawn, the first light in the universe, but actually the dark ages before cosmic dawn. I'm very excited about that. And we can do it for a fraction of the price because they could use the Gateway as a communications relay. And so instead of a $500 million mission, it's a $90 million mission. That means we can do more astrophysics with the gateway than we could do without the gateway. It ties human exploration to the Science Mission Directorate of NASA in a way that is significant. It's not a zero-sum game, it's additive. And I think that is an important message for what the gateway brings. So it brings science, it brings applications, it enables landers. It's an open architecture, so the way we do communications and docking and environmental control and life support and data and avionics, all of it's available to the public on the internet. So if you're a small country or a small company and you want to integrate with the gateway, there's ways to do that. And so people can build applications onto the gateway that right now we're not even thinking of. And so it really is a key enabler for commercial and international partners. And it's not just about landers or going to Mars. It's about astrophysics. It's about planetary science. It's about heliophysics. And it's even about Earth science. We have to remember, we could operate from the gateway. We could do control of a dozen missions on the moon at the same time. Telerobotics from the gateway, I think, is a capability that should be developed. So you could do multiple human missions to the surface of the moon all at the same time with the command module, that being the gateway in orbit around the moon. So it really is an enabler, and once it's developed, there will be companies out there, maybe like your own, that think of ways to use it that right now we're not even thinking of, but are great ideas. And we want it to be a key enabler for commercial and international partnerships.
Thank you for that response. And just to close up, I know there is a lot more questions, but we were given the time. And maybe you can stay for a little bit to answer some questions from the public if we don't have that much time. But I would like to get your thoughts on, just as a closing remarks, a message that you have for the present and future of space leaders that you have here in the room.
So obviously, young professionals are here. And I think one of the questions I get from young professionals a lot is, what advice would you give when you're trying to, you're in your industry, you're trying to rise in your industry, you're trying to be that leader. What advice would you give to me as I try to grow in this industry? And I'll tell you the same thing. I had a commanding officer when I was in the Navy, and here's the key thing as you grow in your industry. It's about sustained superior performance. Doing your job, doing it well, being content with where you are, and doing the absolute best job you can do right where you are right now is key. And I would say that that's true whether you're a pilot in the Navy, as I was, whether you're a young professional, maybe an engineer or a scientist in your current field that you may be in. Sustained superior performance is key to all of these activities and success. So I would leave you with that. I would also say this in closing, if I could. Again, I cannot reiterate how important it is for you to understand we don't want another generation like mine to go by without people living and working on another world. You are the Artemis generation. This is your opportunity to set the course for humanity to go further into the solar system than we've ever been able to go. Yes, it starts at the moon. We're going to the moon with purpose. That is to get to Mars. This generation needs to identify itself as the Artemis generation. We love the Apollo generation, but we are the Artemis generation. We need to set a course so that when we go to the moon this time, it's sustainable. We go to stay. We learn how to live and work on another world. Ultimately, it gives us the opportunity to go to Mars. So with that, I just want to say thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. And I know you mentioned I could stick around and ask questions. I was just given the thumb that I got to get out of here.
Tried.
So I apologize.
Fine.
So anyway, thank you all for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Bridenstine, for talking with us about the plans for NASA missions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this town hall and for your questions. And thank you to the GNF and the IAF Workforce Development and Young Professionals Committee for putting this together. Have a nice day.